Each week, we discuss down-to-earth tips and advice while doing our best to help you seasonally manage your garden and landscape. I'm Joanne Shaw, owner of Down2Earth Landscape Design, and with me is my co-host and co-author, Matthew Dressing.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Matthew Dressing, owner of Natural Affinity Garden Design. As landscape designers and gardeners, we believe it's important and possible to have great gardens, which are sustainable and low maintenance, and we want to help you make it happen.
That's right. And we want to thank you for tuning in today and listening to our November in the Garden episode. Even though as we record this episode, it does not feel like it's anywhere close to November, does it, Matt?
Not at all. Yeah, it has been unseasonably warm. They were right, as we were talking about in earlier episodes, that it is going to be a very warm, unseasonably so, October. And it is held true as we reach the last days. Yeah, we were talking before the show. I went out to clients to do some fall cleanup, and I can't even believe it's so beautiful. I went dressed for a November day or late October day, and I was dying to eat. So yeah, it is unseasonably warm, but that means there's still lots of things that you can get to if you haven't quite got to them yet.
That's
So
right. That's right.
So we'll talk about them in November in the garden. Yeah.
Yeah, especially since there's not really that much to do in November, but I feel like November is the good time to, like, all the stuff you didn't get done in October, you can still do, especially if it's mild, you can still do in November.
Definitely.
Yes, and the first one that comes to my mind is bulbs. And I prefer to planting bulbs. I prefer to do them as late as possible. Just the battle with the squirrels and all of that. How about you?
Yeah, I agree totally. I'm the same way. I leave it as late as I possibly can. Yeah, because the squirrels, they're still foraging as long as it's warm. Until we get a really good frost or good cold snap, they're going to be out and about and active. It's too warm for them to go to sleep. So why risk your bulbs? Of course, unless you're planting things like your alliums or your daffodils or fritillarias, where they're not really going to bother them or dig them. They might dig them up, but they're not going to take them away as food because they're not going to eat them.
Right.
You could plant them earlier if it so fit your schedule. But yeah, the classics like our tulips and our crocuses that everybody loves are going to be easy pickings for our critter friends. So yeah, I love to wait and as long as possible. And as long as you can work that ground, you can plant them. I think I've said on the show before, I've planted them in the first week of January. It was just, there was snow, but it hadn't really frozen yet. And we were able to get into the ground and they came up perfectly. So yeah, if you haven't planted bulbs yet, I still have some clients I need to put some bulbs in for. So I'm going to still be doing it. You have lots of time to still plant some bulbs for sure.
Yes. What you might not have time for is actually purchasing them. So as much as we're suggesting that you wait on the planting, I do advise that you get out there and do some shopping and kind of get especially the good ones, you know. Yeah. They may sell out, you know, they're definitely popular and they may sell out at your local garden centers, that type of thing. Sometimes if you wait, you might get them on sale at the big box store because they got to clear them out so they can make room for, oh my goodness, Christmas decorations. But so I've gotten some deals in the past that way. Have you ever done, because I know you garden on your balcony, have you done them in a container at all, like to try to force them or that type of thing?
Yeah, I've done them in my window boxes in the past. And so I'll just layer some like larger tulips. I think the ones I often did a few years were daffodils, but then I put some crocuses or muscari or grape hyacinth. So I had something taller and then something shorter, like in between. And then I always left a little like 4-inch pot unplanted, so just like an empty pot. To put ivy in so I could pull it out the pot and then plug a little ivy in there. And then I always had something trailing. But yeah, I would plant the bulbs, plant them like normal. I mean, you're not going to be able to maybe get the 6 inches on the package, but a good potting mix. And then I put them right up against my wall on the northeast side. So they got a little bit of sun, but they did stay nice and cold all the way through. And so
Okay.
as they started to show up, or as it started to warm up, I just put the window boxes out where they were, let the sun warm them up, and they all started to come up. So my ivies I'd put out as soon as I could. If you do something like ivies, you end up with them starting to blush. They'll get some cold damage, and they'll kind of turn a little bit of red. But that's not too
That's
bad.
okay. Yeah.
That's okay. And they'll go green again eventually and grow out of it. And then I just let them warm up. I get the crocuses or the muscari coming first, and then the daffodils blooming in mid-spring would come up afterwards, or the tulips, or if I had an early
Mm-hmm.
spring tulip, you could do it that way too. So yeah,
Excellent.
definitely successful a way of doing it, especially if you have a very large container. You can
Mm-hmm.
layer things like fritillarias and alliums and really get a thriller, filler, spiller kind of look
Yeah.
going with it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I think it's a cool gift idea too. So if there's anybody out there
definitely.
that has time and space to store it and keep them cool, I think it's a neat thing that you could do now, and then give as a gift. And then, whether it's a gift for the new year, if you've got somebody in your life who has a January, February birthday, I think it's a cool gift, or even at Christmas, and just, so I think it's an idea. I'd love it as a gift.
Oh yeah, for sure. Especially as you get into Easter, you just want a pop of spring color. Now's the
Hmm.
time to get the selection. We're always looking in the garden centers for those forced tulips or daffodils or hyacinths or something, right? So yeah,
Hmm.
a great
Hmm.
gift idea.
Yeah. And speaking of bulbs and a great gift idea, we can't forget about amaryllis.
That's right. November in the garden is the time to plant your amaryllis, especially if you want it blooming for Christmas. So, as we mentioned, it is the almost November, which means it is time for Christmas to start appearing in the stores. And amaryllis will show up at the beginning to mid time in our independent garden centers and other places. So that's the time to pick it up. Like our other bulbs, get out there early, watch at your favorite stores, especially if you want some of the funkier ones or the newer cultivars for the season. I always like there's a green one that's like green, red, and white, and it's kind of all striped and picketed, but they go so fast. So watch for your favorite one now, and then you want to have it planted up between November 12th and November 15th if you want it to flower for around Christmas.
Oh, okay.
So by the time we get into, the week before Christmas and the week of Christmas, when we're having dinner parties or we're looking for a couple of key pieces of decoration before the big day or at the big day, that's when we want to plant our amaryllis for sure.
Okay. And
Yeah.
I brought in because I put mine outside. So I have
Mhm.
five, I believe, five bulbs that I put outside. I've never done this before. I put them outside for the whole summer. I didn't plant them, but I just had them out. And now I brought them back in and they're in a dark cupboard. So is that the same thing? Like, do I need to bring them out kind of mid-November and start feeding them and watering them, and that'll bring them out of their dormancy?
Yeah, so the bulb itself doesn't need like a full dormancy. Um, but yeah, lowering the light and kind of telling it it's time to kind of stop for a bit and then bringing it back out and giving it those longer days will give it that, short day,
Okay.
growing longer day period where we're going to
Hmm.
see that force a spike. Kind of like our holiday cactus, our Christmas, Easter, and
Okay.
Thanksgiving cactus. They bloom when the days start to grow longer. Yeah. So we
Okay.
can bring them out
Now,
and they'll spike.
when I put them away, I didn't, they all had leaves that were kind of, some of them were still green. I think one was a bit brown. But I didn't cut them off. I just left them because I figured that maybe in the cupboard they would just kind of go dormant themselves and fall off. So when I take them out, am I cutting back those leaves?
If they're still green, you can leave them.
Okay.
But if you find that they're dead, yeah, just cut them off and then they'll detect warmer and more water and a little bit more light. And they should respike or give you out some more leaves again.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
good.
So it's up to you.
Yeah.
They may just go partly evergreen depending on how dark that cupboard is. If there's
Hmm.
any light penetrating through the cracks or anything like that, they may stay. But if it's very, very dark or pitch black permanently, they'll probably go to sleep or lose or abandon their leaves. Yeah.
Okay.
But everybody's cupboard and everybody's situation is
I
different, right?
know,
So
so different, so different. And I haven't had luck doing this. So that's why I put them outside. In the past, I've just brought them, like put them in dark and then brought them out into the light in still in the basement though. I haven't. So this is my first time that I put them outside.
yeah,
So
very
yeah, so I'm
nice.
curious to see how this goes.
Listeners will have to follow along to
Yes.
see how it turns out.
So our vegetables and fruits. So if we, haven't had time, I finally got to pulling out all my old tomato and lots of the veg that we had kind of that was, all dried and, you know, ready to be pulled out. I finally got to the cleanup.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So now is the time, if you haven't, getting out and removing any of the tomatoes or the lettuce or any of the other veggies. It was a great season as well, though. If you wanted to extend your season, you could still be planting some very short day lettuces or spinaches. Or if you do have some stuff that is looking good, still you might again put up a hoop house or protect them just to again extend
Oh,
that season.
sense.
Right now, I would be opening them just a little bit because especially here in the GTA, we've had 16-degree plus weather. But otherwise, yeah, it is time to start picking up all of that rotting fruit and dead lettuce and everything like that, and just pulling it out, or even just cutting it down to the ground, letting winter come in and killing it. Yeah, so tidying up our veg garden. I know my containers are all nice and clean. I
Are
do
they?
have some shallots that are still there, some green onions. They've been loving the last 4 weeks, and they're just pumping out new greens. I always cut them for nachos or
Yeah.
potatoes or something like that. So yeah, they're still just booming along. So yeah,
Oh,
so
good.
definitely time to clean up. We don't want to overwinter any pests or
Mm,
diseases,
right, right.
especially to pop up and show up for next year.
Yeah. And speaking of pests, if you do have a fruit tree, um, any trees, I'm going to talk about that when we get to trees and shrubs as well. But we certainly know that mice and rabbits love the bark on fruit trees. So we do recommend now as, getting to the garden center and buying, if you don't already have it in your garage, like I do, those white vinyl, tree wrap.
Yeah, yeah, the little vinyl tree guards for sure.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, so it will really help. It's an easy thing to do. They're fairly inexpensive, but it protects, you always think, who made that damage? Because it's so high up. It couldn't have been an app, a mouse or a rabbit, but you forget about the snow, right? So as the
exactly.
snow reaches high, then they can get to different heights on the trunk and really cause some damage and really destruction, really.
Yeah, exactly. If they girdle that trunk,
Mm.
they've cut off all that veins for all that sap to go back up and do its thing. So you can end up with it dead. The other thing to do, remember too, is um, just make sure you're taking it off because it
Oh,
doesn't
yes.
expand and grow with the tree.
Yeah,
Yeah, so you do want to take it off in the spring. If you found that you can leave it on for the spring, but you don't want to leave it on year after year. If
right.
you do find that your fruit tree is blooming, and then you year after year you kind of get hit by the frost, you can leave that on until we start to see the flowering. Because what happens is the white vinyl will reflect some of the light and the heat energy being absorbed by the trunk, and it'll slow the warming of the trunk and start to
Really?
delay the flowers. Yeah. It used to be, and I don't know anymore. So if there's any European listeners, I would love for you to comment on this episode and let me know. But the Europeans used to paint hydrated lime on the fruit trees, and it would last for about a year. But what would happen is that white would reflect the light, and then it would slowly delay the flowers to come out. So you'd skip the frost by the time they warmed up and generated enough to bloom.
Oh.
Yeah. So that can be a whole debate too because of phenological order and is it blooming at the right time at the same time
Hmm.
as the bees and the other beneficials. But yes. So it's one of those tricks. If you find that yours is blooming a little too early and you're losing it every year,
Mm.
you may do that as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could that help even with magnolias?
Yes, I can see that. Yeah, older when they're young, yes, but the older they
Yes.
get, they're just so big, right?
Yes, yes, yeah.
That
We definitely are
that might be
talking young
hard.
trees. I mean that it is meant to go, around thinner, and fruit trees do tend to be like a thinner trunk. So that's
Right.
why they but even the Japanese maples, anything that's thinner, some of
Yeah.
the standard trees, it's just a good idea to get that tree wrap. And I know myself, I haven't done it in a few years and I haven't been recommending it to my clients. And I did have several clients last year that had some damage. So that's why I wanted to really make sure we talked about it today to just
Yeah.
encourage everybody to, it's a simple thing.
It is. It is a simple thing. It takes like literally 2 minutes to throw her around and play
Hmm.
with her, and it does so much benefit over that season of
Hmm.
growth for sure. For sure. What else is growing in our gardens? It's the end of our annuals and perennials.
Hmm.
You can definitely be pulling out your annuals or cutting them back to the ground. I always find, especially if you're replanting in that area, to definitely pull out those root balls. It makes it easier to do than in the spring. They just come
Hmm.
and pop right out. You can leave them if you just want to let them kind of decompose over the next couple of years, but definitely you can pull them completely out. If there are some things like I always think of like alyssum. If you have something like an alyssum or a portulaca that you're going to let self seed and come back, you can
Okay.
leave those annuals in place, and they'll act as like a protective nursery for those ones that are going to self seed for you every
Oh,
year as well. So don't
okay.
pull those ones, but maybe pull your other ones that aren't going
Hmm.
to self seed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And as far as your perennials go, we have talked about it, for years on the show about we really don't have to do much.
No.
I mean, I do kind of, we haven't gotten a frost that's killed the hosta leaves yet. So
Mm-hmm.
I do not a fan of looking at mushy yellow hosta leaves. So I do kind of suggest you clean those up if you are able to. And if you're not, that's no big deal because they will dry up and be nothing in the spring, right? But as far as your other perennials go, it's really nothing you need to do much. The stems there's some seeds there for depending on the perennial for birds to eat off of. We know our native bees, a whole bunch of different types of and varieties of native bees that may overwinter in the stem. If there's something that's really high and you do want to kind of cut it back, what you could do is do that, but just leave the stems on the ground beside the plant, right, Matt? Like you don't, we do not have to vacuum and quote unquote put the garden to bed anymore, right?
Exactly. It was just an old way of thinking and keeping it looking clean and fresh, and it was
Hmm.
an aesthetics thing. But naturally, no one goes around and does any of that stuff out in nature, and we want to build that biodiversity and
Hmm.
return that nature to our gardens, and that helps with a lot of those insects and pests and diseases, and other things as well.
That's
So yeah,
right.
definitely. The only thing I would really recommend removing if it was an issue was just anything that was heavily diseased, just so
Yeah.
it doesn't continue its intensity into the year after. I always think of like we talked about cutting back our peonies
Yeah.
just recently, right? They're usually riddled with powdery mildew depending on your spot, or have a touch of it anyways. So cutting those back and removing it because it's the time, or something else had a powdery mildew or a rust, it's good to remove those so they don't overwinter and create more problems. But yeah,
Hmm.
let nature do her thing. Let
Hmm.
nature do her thing. So
Another thing in November that you might not think of because sometimes you're kind of done, right? But especially since the weather has been pretty good, now is a good time to relocate some of your annuals or some of your perennials or shrubs. I did that this week, Matt. I had cut back my peonies, and I have been. My sun is changing. Where I'm. So I've have a few peony bushes that are no longer getting very much sun, so not really performing. So
mm.
I was able to relocate them. I was able to, I ended up taking out a few hydrangeas in order to do that. Yeah, I know, some of
What?
my bobos. So it is a good time because I think in the spring there's so much to do and you forget what, and peonies especially do prefer to be moved in the fall than they do in the spring.
Yeah.
So I even moved a tree peony, so fingers crossed there that worked out okay. I know. Hopefully those are movable.
Yeah,
Yes.
they're pretty
Good.
tough.
Phew. Phew. And I've had to, well, and then I thought we were going to get a ton of rain and we didn't. And so then I had to water and then now we've gotten a bit more rain. So I'm glad about that. So yeah,
Yeah,
so that is something to think about. You can, even though you might feel kind of done as far as gardening goes, but if there's something you were unhappy with, the location, or that some one plant's kind of overgrowing another plant, and you want to move it, now is the time to do that.
exactly. I like you mentioned watering as well.
Mhm.
That's another key point, especially here in the GTA, because we've had such a warm season. Things are still transpiring and going through the water that they have in the ground. So you still may need to go out, especially with newer plants or newer plantings. You still need to go out and make sure they do get a little bit of a drink down to the bottom of that root ball. Or if you have some larger, older, established plant material and it has been very dry or unusually dry, consider going out and still just again watering the base. Don't water their leaves, depending on where you are. You don't
Mhm.
need to encourage any diseases, but giving them a good drink, because even now, as their leaves are starting to go, they are still transpiring and they are still using and resources and fortifying themselves, and do need a little bit of that water so they can finish going to bed now. So yeah, don't forget about all that water. Don't forget about that watering, especially as we move into things like our evergreen shrubs. And I always say it, but that once a week rule. Once a week to the bottom of the hole until the ground freezes solid. Evergreens are evergreen. They'll always have moisture being
Mhm.
pulled out, high pressure, low pressure kind of thing. Leaf being high pressure of water,
Yeah.
air is nice and dry, just pulling out water. So it needs to replace that, or else we start to see it brown, especially when she wakes up in the spring.
Hmm.
Mm.
And I think that is better to do. So we will have some listeners who are fans of all those covers and those little tents and those little or tree, burlap. We all kind of there's a place for burlap and we'll get to that. But
Yes.
the industry has created all of these little I guess gadgets or these things to quote unquote protect our plants for the winter. But if we watered them, I think, I think it's, there's low maintenance and then but there's no such thing as no maintenance. So I
Mm.
feel like it's a bit of I don't know. Is it a bit of a I don't even know what to call it. Of a cheat or a shortcut to buy those little tents and teepees. But the reason we plant evergreens is so that you would see the evergreens in the winter.
Yeah.
I don't want to see these little tents in my garden. And no offense, I certainly don't want to see them in yours either. Not you, Matt, but our listeners. So I think you're putting in evergreens and you're putting in things that attract, that look nice and interesting in the winter. I think it's so artificial, and that just seems to start the last 5 years or so, eh? The trend, and I get it, that people need to make money or whatever on those pieces of I don't even know what to call it, garden accessories or garden
Yes.
whatever. But to me, you can't put it in the same boat as like the tree wrap or the
No.
burlap for Japanese maple, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Those are really functional. I think those little teepees and those little, like covers, I think they're like dessert covers, I think of,
They are. That's exactly what I
right?
think. Yeah.
Uh, you know, just water your garden and water anything that's newly planted, water an evergreen that needs to be, and I saw in another Facebook group about someone who had this summer had planted a yew hedge, and they were asking, he said, oh, for the first season, I'm going to go and cover it all with burlap or maybe get some of those, those little covers. And I'm like, no, and I think he did say he was getting the covers and he was like, do I fill the covers with leaves and then cover the evergreen? And I'm like, oh, no.
No.
So,
No.
yeah, so I'm sorry if you're a listener and you did that, but yes, no, Mother Nature like knows what it's doing, if something was newly planted, whether you planted it last week or you planted it this season,
Mhm.
the 2023 garden season, it's still considered a new plant in your garden, and it just needs to be watered well so that it could draw up the water throughout the winter.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
we did. Yeah, I was gonna say that's literally like you said, nature has it all figured
Hmm.
out. We've just broken her natural mulch, and we just have to make
Yeah.
sure she has water.
And sometimes there might be a reason to do a wind screen,
Hmm.
like maybe there is a plant that you really loved and you planted it in a kind of a windy spot, and then you could do a bit of a wind screen. I think it'd be better to plant other plants to provide that wind screen kind of in front of it or front of it or around it. But that certainly doesn't mean, tightly winding and tightly covering your plant.
Agreed. Agreed. Yes. Do we want to talk about that in our shrubs, or do we want to quickly move through lawn? And as we follow the order of our book,
That's
if you
right.
have our book Down the Garden Path, a step-by-step guide to your Ontario garden, we're just moving through our month. So don't forget to pick up your copy on Amazon to have all of these tips at your fingertips at any
Literally.
time of year, literally at your fingertips at any time of the year.
That's right.
Um,
Well, lawn is big, and we did do. We've got a previous show that we just released about those five lawn care tips. So we don't necessarily need to do a deep dive, but I'm sure you. So if you do want like the absolute five things you need to do, then listen to that past show, right, Matt?
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. We can almost just skip over it because it's like you need to go
Yeah.
listen to that episode right now because that covers everything that you need to do in November for
Hmm.
sure. So there's lawn, the shortest lawn we've ever done on the
That's
show.
right. The shortest lawn we've ever done. Oh my goodness. My goodness. So yes. Da, da, da. Um, so if we go back to trees and shrubs, so trees also, I think we mentioned shrubs and perennials about watering them, but trees are really important to water too.
Yes, indeed. We don't want to let any of our newly planted trees, whether there are street trees or especially if there are street
Mm,
trees, uh, blue or dry out as well. We want to make sure that they also get enough water to make it through the winter. I think, and you're a huge fan of this, making sure that those street trees get
mhm.
watered. Yeah, I think they're often, like you've said as well in the past, they're often neglected. Everybody thinks they're just a street tree.
Mhm.
It's the city's responsibility, but really it's part of your landscape. It is a
Yeah.
key component of your landscape.
Mhm.
And why wouldn't you want your street tree to look big and beautiful
Yeah.
and keep it healthy for sure? Make sure that you are still watering your trees. If you're in a spot where it's warm enough, for example, us, we haven't had the ground freeze. Even though they are losing their leaves, those roots are still active, preparing to shut down. We've said it on the show many times. The tree gators or those tree bags where you can fill it with water, you still have time to put one of those out and let them just soak in and do your
Mm,
thing. Those roots are
good
still
to know.
active, doing their thing. We still have the ground unfrozen. They'll still take that water.
And if you did have a newly planted small tree, then the tree wrap, like we previously mentioned,
Yes.
you might consider staking. Like if you noticed, on a windy day, we've had some windy days this past week.
Hmm.
If the new tree was installed and was planted, but not with a stake, you can kind of evaluate. Sometimes it's good to not bother with a stake and let the plant, kind of, strengthen its roots to actually do the work. But sometimes if it's in a particularly bad spot and it needs a little bit of help for the first year or so. We definitely don't need to. It's like the tree wrap, right? You need to take it off. It's not going to be there forever.
That's right. Yes, like the tree wrap, we do want to leave them on for a year or two. And when you put your stakes in, you want to make sure you're putting them outside of the root ball. So if
Mm,
you dug a 1.5 foot wide hole, then you're going to put them out beyond that 1.5 foot. We want stable, undisturbed ground. And like you said, that tree to kind of wiggle and build that taper and build its own strength to stand. That's called thigmomorphogenesis. There's
ooh,
our term for the day. I'll add it
term
to
for the
our yeah, thigmomorphogenesis. It's where
Okay. Can you
that's
add that to the show notes?
to the show notes. Yeah, that's where it gets that by touch and the movement of the wind. It develops
Okay.
that dense taper and it prevents it from long, stringy, whatever growth. Anyways, I
Oh.
digress.
Oh, he still loves his science, you guys. He still loves his science words and things and stuff. And I love learning something like that from you. So thank you. If you do have a shrub, I know I did move some shrubs around in my garden. Like I mentioned, I moved the peonies, I moved some other shrubs around, I removed some shrubs. So now is kind of a good time to do that if you're trying to make room for, planting in the spring. I feel like it's just something sometimes you just remember now and in the spring you forget. And then, it's like July and you're like, oh yeah, I was supposed to move that, or yeah, that wasn't supposed to be there.
Mm.
So now's a good time to do that if you want to continue to putter in the garden.
So let's talk about again, go back and revisit our protecting our trees and shrubs if we
Mhm.
need to. We definitely emphasize using the tree wrap, especially for young trees and fruiting trees or maples, things with delicious bark for our animals. We like to leave our evergreens out so that we can see them evergreen, but there are some situations where we might want to build a wind screen or a
Mhm.
salt screen just to protect any of our trees or shrubs or hedges. For example, like that gentleman you were mentioning, or whoever that individual was, they were building a hedge of yews and all of that protection. Yeah, we don't necessarily need to do that, but if you know that hedge is on an exposed side of your yard or an open area across the street, or you're on the top of a hill and you know this area gets windswept, you may consider putting up just a screen. And so what that means is you're not going to cover the whole thing, but you're going to basically put in posts every 4 to 6 feet, and you're going to create a wall of burlap
Mhm. Mhm.
on that. And it's just on the wind side to
Right.
help break some of that wind. I always recommend, usually like 6 to 8 inches above as well, just so the wind kind of pushes and flows over it. It doesn't
Good
burn out
point.
the top.
Mhm.
And that's kind of where, if you're on the unscreened side, it may look a little ugly, just because you can see the tops of the posts and the whatever. But
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, but
but
dead trees look ugly too, so we're trying
but
to keep
yeah,
the trees alive.
that's right. Burnt
Yeah.
evergreens look just as ugly.
That's right. That's right. And it's the same idea with Japanese maples. We talk
Mhm.
about protecting them. Now, I feel, I don't know if you agree or not, I feel like it's only really important the first couple of years until they get established, they get their roots established. Again, it's the wind. They are
Yeah.
in nature in Japan, they are an understory tree, whereas in Canada, we seem to plant them in the middle of front lawns, right?
Yeah.
So we need to protect the wind. So it is hammering wooden stakes around the perimeter and stapling the burlap to those to that to the stakes. It's fine for them to get snow and rain, and we don't need to close up the top of them. I've seen some people, tie that up into a nice little bundle. Really don't want to do that. You do want it to get the moisture and the snow. It is really meant to just be a windscreen. And again, I know the first couple of years, I always feel bad when I put one in the front yard and and they put in lighting and they are just so excited about their new front yard. And I'm like, yeah, but in winter, you're gonna have to like have this little eyesore for the first couple of years just to protect your Japanese maple. But it's usually worth it, and they're usually fine with doing that. So I always say you wrap some Christmas lights around it or something to make it look better. But yeah, so if you've got any questions about that, we do have pictures. We've got previous episodes. I'm sure that we've talked specifically about Japanese maples and pictures on our Instagram as well. So, and of course, in our book, we've got a step-by-step process of doing that in the book. So, or you can just reach out with questions if you've got questions. You know where to find us. So, you also can use the windscreen, like Matt was saying about evergreens, to do that, to do a burlap screen. And remember, I mentioned that the other person mentioned about putting leaves and things, but that just makes a house for and a cozy spot for insect or not insects for mice. So, again, if you're going to use one of those little teepees over something, you don't want to fill it with leaves and soil or anything like that. And same with if you're covering a newly planted evergreen, you want to do a screen or you just want to make sure you're watering well. You don't want to mound a lot of things on purpose around your evergreens. What about rose protection, Matt?
Well, I was just going to say that too. I was going to follow up with rose protection. And
Hmm.
then I was also just going to throw out one last thing about, as you mentioned, leaves and debris and mice and things getting in there. I also do that with when I put the stakes up as well, like around a Japanese maple or have to build like one of those open topped forts. I always also recommend leaving a little bit of like a flare on the bottom. So don't put like your burlap like end it right at the ground. Let it
Oh,
kind of
okay.
skirt, and then the burlap will absorb a little water or there get some soil on there and it'll freeze. So if there is a little bit of a thaw or there are still some activity, they can't get underneath there and then get in there and
Okay.
build a home if anything does make its way
Mm.
in there as well. So just like
Yeah.
another little layer of defense.
Yeah.
Yeah, but rose protection again, another great idea. Rose protection. One of my clients, they had a gift where they got a little one of those little mini roses,
Oh,
the
yeah.
type you buy in early
Hmm.
spring, and they are actually hardy out in the yard garden.
Yeah.
So
And they're
we
really prolific bloomers too.
they just literally just spew flowers from spring to
Hmm.
fall. Theirs is still blooming right now, and I'm waiting. What we want to do for protection is we need a good frost before we put them to sleep.
Okay.
So we want a good first light frost, but a good like a moderate frost. We don't need like this is the first ice freezing. It's never going
Hmm.
to, but a good solid frost, and then we can start to protect them because we're going to start to get some good frosts after that. If we
Okay.
build a hut or a fort around them, what'll happen is they'll start to sweat under there. And I would kept thinking about that with
Oh,
um, the guy who's putting the leaves and then he's going to wrap
yeah.
it tightly. I was like, on a warm day like we're seeing in late October, that's just going to heat up like a little greenhouse and it's just going to sweat. You're going to unwrap it and it's going to have sweat to death and burnt. So, same with roses. We do want to mound them and just protect their root zone a little bit because most of the roses that you're going to buy are grafted. So they have
Mm.
a hardier rootstock, and the graft is above the ground on the crown. And then above that is the scion wood, the one that we've wanted to keep because it gives beautiful scented lots of roses. So we want to protect that graft, so just mounding them around for 4 to 6 inches around that graft and then putting over your rose collar or your rose cover. Even if you do like a cover, you can do those like little paper houses and then just anchor it with some soil or some rocks. Or you could leave it completely open, and that's where you'll see the rose collars. So it's about 10 inches of plastic, and you dig a little trench, you wrap
Okay.
that around it, and then you fill the inside and outside of the cover with some soil or just some leaves.
Okay.
I do the little hut because it's just a little mini rose, and I literally just take some extra mulch or soil and push
Okay.
it up against the edges. And there's always like you find a little rock in the garden. Well, I keep one underneath one of their shrubs just to kind of
Hmm.
help anchor it or
Yeah.
wedge it in. But
Now I have carpet roses and I don't do anything, I must
well,
say.
that was my butt. But if you do have things like your carpet roses or your climbing roses, um, so easies, things like that,
Yeah,
you
you like hardy shrub roses, right? And
shrub
even
roses. That's
the
the word I was looking for.
yeah, the what is it called? Explorer series. I got those
Yes,
hardy shrub roses and things.
you
The
don't need to
native
do a
ones with the
thing.
rose hips. Like there's really nothing you need to do, right?
No, it's more for like the grandifloras, floribundas, hybrid teas,
Teas, yeah.
those ones that are really the more ones you're going to mound. Yeah. Climbing roses, I mean, they're going to do their thing. And like you said, like the shrubs and the ground covers and they're all those guys, they're perfectly fine as well. They're
Hmm.
going to do it. If you think of like your Walmart garden, I always see them there's all the ways at the Walmart near me. They have all sorts of the Rosa rugosa shrub roses, and they don't do anything. And they take all
Hmm.
the salt, they don't prune them except for maybe to shape them in early spring or late spring, but they have no protection. So they're good and tough. So if you have one of those types, you're good. If you have the other ones and you're finding it's weak every year or it's dying back too much every year, you may need to give it a little bit of protection. Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. So I think we've covered everything. If we did miss something, then we would love to hear from you about what other advice you need in your November garden. We're assuming you've already brought your house plants inside and your tropical plants should be inside, or else you're bringing them inside to the garbage to toss them, right? I brought my figs into the garage. So yeah, so I think we have covered everything. So yeah, is there anything else that you think we missed, Matt?
No, I think that's it. So, thank you everybody for joining us on this episode of Down the Garden Path. I'm Matthew Dressing here with my co host and co author, Joanne Shaw. Joanne and I enjoy hosting Down the Garden Path, bringing you interesting and relevant topics to help you achieve a great garden. We've learned right along with you from our research and from the wonderful guests who have joined us here on the show.
That's right. So don't forget, you can spend more time with us down the garden path. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Down the Garden Path Podcast. You can also find us on your favorite podcast provider. And while you are there, please hit that subscribe button to be notified of new content. And please don't forget to like, share, and leave us a comment. We love hearing from our listeners. You can always write us at Down the Garden Path Podcast at hotmail.com or via our websites. You can find me at Down2Earth.ca with the number 2 and Matt at naturalaffinity.ca. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us down the garden path.